A really great show for you. We'll look at what the state legislature has been doing to try to regulate the boxing industry in North Carolina. The outer edges of Hurricane Erin have been lapping at some of the state's southern beaches, and we'll be talking with a man who has written a book about the history of hurricanes in North Carolina. And we'll also take a tour of historic Fort Macon and tempt you with a great dessert recipe from the Now Kitchen. So let's get started. Brush with Florida after having first hit land in central Florida on Wednesday. Erin is only a Category 1 hurricane and did not pack as strong a punch as some hurricanes can. The devastating nature of hurricanes is all too familiar to the people who live in coastal communities, particularly here in North Carolina. Our state has a long history of being badgered by hurricanes, and our guest tonight has chronicled the history of hurricanes in North Carolina. He is Jay Barnes, the director of the North Carolina Aquarium at Pine Knoll Shores, and his new book is called North Carolina's Hurricane History. Jay, it's a pleasure to have you with us tonight.
Glad to be here.
What made you decide to take on the project of writing a book about history of hurricanes?
Well, Maria, I've had a long time interest. I grew up in Brunswick County. I grew up hearing a lot of the stories of Hazel and some of the other storms that affected that region. And then eventually went to work for the North Carolina Aquarium. We put on a hurricane awareness program every season and just developed a strong interest, started doing a little research on my own, and then one day decided it would make a great project so we could develop a little better sense of what to expect in the future from hurricanes in our state.
Well, the book is amazing to look at. The photographs alone are just incredible. You cover more than 50 hurricanes and span many, many years in North Carolina. How did you go about doing your research and getting those incredible photographs?
Well, the research much of it was done for me, frankly. The National Weather Service has done an excellent job through the years of compiling the wind speeds and the storm surge and other kinds of meteorological data. A lot of the newspapers of the state were helpful in providing the anecdotal stories and other interesting bits of information in documenting the storms. And finding the photographs really was the hard part, especially the older storms. Prior to the 1940s and 1950s, there really are not very many pictures that tell the story of what kind of storms we've had. If you go back into the last century, storms like the 1899 hurricane, for example, and others, the only information we have about them tends to be regarding the shipwrecks, the ships that have gone down. David Stick's book on shipwrecks was a great source of information. So there are a lot of recent photographs available, but the older ones were much harder to find.
Well, which photo are we seeing now?
Well, in 1913, for example, New Bern was flooded. Much of New Bern was flooded by a severe hurricane that came, sort of washed through Pamlico Sound and pushed a surge of water up the Neuse River. And it's just one of many hurricanes that has affected New Bern through the years.
I know that in addition to the research that you've done, you've been able to talk to a lot of people who either saw some of these hurricanes or or were descendants of people who saw them. For example, look at this photograph and tell us what we're seeing here. I understand this one is quite unique.
Well, Hurricane Hazel still stands probably as the benchmark for hurricanes along the North Carolina coast, at least in this century. And this is a photograph taken by Hugh Morton down at Carolina Beach during the peak of the storm. Hazel was again, a Category 4 hurricane. A 17-foot storm surge washed over Long Beach. Tremendous destruction in that area. 150-mile-per-hour winds. Wrightsville Beach and Carolina Beach also hit very hard by Hurricane Hazel. Even on the outer edges of Hazel, up in Carteret County, as you see here, Front Street in downtown Beaufort was flooded by several feet of water. So Hazel was one of those storms that, as it moved inland, caused tremendous destruction in Raleigh and Rocky Mount and other areas as well.
Looking at those photos, it really gives you a renewed respect for what nature can do. I understand that you even documented a hurricane that went back as early as the 1500s. Now, how'd you find out about that one?
Well, in the book, there actually are very few accounts of the storms of the 16th or 17th or 18th century. There just aren't very many reports or accurate information available on those. But I did uncover a few, mostly from libraries and journals and letters that I was able to find. The more recent period of time, the last century and the 20th century, the information is much more complete.
Well, you mentioned Hurricane Hazel. A lot of people who live along the coast still remember that one, and there was an awful lot of destruction that came. Do you think that was perhaps one of the worst ones that has hit North Carolina?
Well, certainly the most severe to strike the North Carolina coast in this century, Category 4, as I said. Now, Hurricane Hugo in 1989 made landfall in South Carolina, did a tremendous amount of destruction throughout western North Carolina, particularly Charlotte. But there have been many other storms through the years that have perhaps been at least as powerful, if not more powerful, than Hazel. We just don't have good information on how powerful they were, what the wind speeds were, and so forth.
There was a period of time in the 50s when we seemed to get an awful lot of hurricanes hitting the North Carolina coast. Was there something about that time period that seemed to make us more vulnerable, or is there something about the North Carolina coast that makes it vulnerable to hurricanes?
Well, we did earn the reputation as Hurricane Alley back in the 50s because we had several storms striking such a short period of time. For example, after Hazel in '54, we had 3 hurricanes make landfall within 6 weeks in the 1955 season, Hurricanes Connie, Diane, and Ione. As you see here, some flooding in downtown Little Washington. So that was a very active period of time. There really is no way to make any prediction or judgment about why we had so many during that time and why we would go for 20 or 30 years without a severe storm. There's a real randomness to the effects of the storms through the years.
Well, I would think that people reading your book can learn a lot about the history and hopefully learn something that will help them to be better prepared for hurricanes that may hit coming up in the future. Is that part of your goal in putting this book out?
I hope so. I hope that it will be educational. I think by looking back at the results of storms through the years, we have a little bit better understanding of what to expect with the next severe hurricane makes landfall here.
And I guess also one of the things that people can learn from reading this is just the respect for what nature can do and how important it is to be able to be prepared and also to be prepared to leave when it's necessary. I know that's a problem sometimes along the coast.
It is. Evacuation of our barrier beaches particularly is critical during severe storms. It's my belief that every family and every business in eastern North Carolina needs to have a hurricane plan. To know something about the elevation of your home and your property, to know where you're going to go and what you're going to take with you, and just generally be prepared. Watching the news and watching the tropics helps also.
Well, Jay, the book is fascinating. You've got some wonderful photographs, some interesting information that I'm sure our viewers will find very helpful and informative, and we're really pleased that you could be here to share it with us tonight. Thanks so much.
My pleasure.